Briahna, what's on your radar?
Well, Robbie, according to a study published earlier this week by Oxfam International, the richest 1% of people claimed nearly twice as much wealth as the rest of the world put together over the past 2 years. Now, I use the word claim here purposefully, just like I'm pretty sure that the Oxfam report used the word bagged instead of earned this wealth. The reason is because the word earn suggests some relationship between the work done and the compensation provided, and both the sheer volume of wealth and the method of wealth acquisition completely belie the idea that this wealth bore any type of proportional relationship to merit, ingenuity, or true contributed value. It's difficult to even conceptualize the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. They both seem like a lot of money to people like you and me. But 1 million seconds is about 11 days. 1 billion seconds is 31 and a half years. Here's a visual guide if that helps.
In my last video, I counted 10,000 grains of rice, where each grain of rice was $100,000. And that was to show you the scale of $1 billion. Well, a lot of you guys asked me, well, how much does Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos have in terms of rice? So that was my mission. I went to Target, I bought a digital food scale, I came home, and then I weighed the rice that was worth $1 billion from earlier. I did the math in my head, and I went to Costco. I got the rice, I brought it home, and once I brought it home, I went to work. I also want to say that I have 5 families that are going to take this unused rice, so it's totally not wasteful. Okay, so the moment you've been waiting for, 100K, 1 million, 1 billion, Jeff Bezos has 122 of these, or 58 pounds of rice. If each grain of rice was 100K. Like, look how big this is, guys.
Now, many people see that enormous volume of wealth and ask, is it possible that someone's contributions to society, that their work, labor, and effort are so significant that they merit having so much when others, including those whose labor enabled the success of those businesses, have so little? Is it right that Amazon workers are passing out from excessive heat while delivering packages or dying from heart attacks on the job, while Bezos has more money many times over than anyone in the history of humanity? More than he could ever hope to spend, enough to buy newspapers, fix prices, and undermine the democratic process. If you think Bezos earned his wealth, well, here's something else to consider. Billionaires make most of their money through asset appreciation. Stuff they already own becomes more valuable by virtue of time passing, interest rates growing, etc. They avoid taxes by avoiding any sale of their assets, instead borrowing against their wealth to pursue new ventures. While ordinary Americans make just north of $50,000 a year on average and are enduring the longest period in American history without an increase in the minimum wage, productivity has steadily increased since the 1950s, only now in the past year experiencing its first little slump. And what have workers gotten from all of that labor, all of that productivity? Nothing. The gap between CEO pay and worker pay has ballooned from about 30-1 in the 1950s to over 300-1 today. All of that productivity, all of the wealth that they generated went to the top 1%. And during the economic crisis of 2020, major corporations begged for and received government handouts to the tune of $4 trillion. The justification for the bailouts? Protecting workers. See, CEOs were supposed to keep their employers on the payroll and keep the economy going. But while welfare checks come with work requirements and all sorts of government oversight, corporate welfare comes with little oversight indeed. I mean, technically, any money distributed via the CARES Act Federal Reserve Program was supposed to come with limitations, no stock buybacks, caps on executive compensation and the like, but that's not what happened. Most of the money distributed via the CARES Act was not subject to any restrictions at all. Billionaires like Kanye West got PPP funds, while as many as 27 million Americans may have lost their health insurance in 2020 as a consequence of losing their jobs. As food costs and energy costs have surged for ordinary Americans, breaking the bank to make an omelet, billionaires have profited, in fact, from that. The Oxfam report shows that 95% of food and energy corporations have more than doubled their profits in 2022, with $306 billion in windfall profits, 84% of which was paid out to wealthy shareholders. The Walton dynasty of Walmart fame received $8.5 billion just this last year. Indian energy billionaire Gautam Adani saw his wealth grow by 46%. And excess corporate profits have driven at least half of inflation in Australia, the United States, and the UK, according to economic experts. There's a direct relationship between the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. All that new wealth is being earned, but the workers who earned it are getting a smaller and smaller piece of the pie. Elites paint a portrait of zero-sum competition between black and white, poor and rural, city and urban, working class people of different political orientations. But all of that is to distract from the real theft, which is top down. Bezos' paper runs article after article about petty theft from drugstores, while wage theft, employers stealing from their workers, remains the most common and voluminous type of theft in the country. And as the Lever recently pointed out, where there's a profit announcement for elites, you don't have to wait very long to see who pays. Microsoft here is increasing dividend payments to wealthy shareholders. Well, what do you know? 10,000 workers at Microsoft are getting laid off. Thank you very much for your service. Quite the system we have here. The richest 1%, again, grabbed nearly 2/3 of all new wealth, $42 trillion, created on the backs of American workers. This is just since 2020. And what do elites have to say about it? Well, over 200 millionaires are asking Davos elites to raise taxes on the ultra-rich. These are comparative poors, at least as compared to the billionaires in attendance at Davos, but they seem to understand that the swelling economic inequity is leading to social instability that will ultimately wreck all of their fortunes. It's simple common sense economics, said the group in an open letter. It is an investment in our common good and a better future that we all deserve. But the American political machine seems not to have gotten the message. Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are high-fiving each other over blocking the very filibuster reform that could have enabled Democrats to actually deliver for the working people they pretend to care about. Meanwhile, Republicans are doing what they always do, cut taxes for the rich under the guise that doing so will help average Americans. Take, for example, the Bush tax cuts, which increased the budget deficit and shifted the tax burden from the rich to the middle and working classes. Look at this chart of the taxes the rich have had to pay over time. Clear downward trend. This time, Republican elites are targeting the IRS, which has itself targeted lower income people for audits. But instead of fixing this problem by going after wealthy tax cheats instead of the poor, Republicans are exploiting a real problem here to justify getting rid of the IRS and its ability to audit the rich altogether. Without funding, the IRS will not be able to hire the skilled auditors necessary to handle the complicated tax maneuvers that rich people use to get out of paying their fair share. Look at how audits of millionaires have plummeted along with IRS staffing and budget cuts. Moreover, House Republicans are advocating for a flat tax, which would limit taxes on individual and corporate income, capital gains, payroll, and estates, instead taxing gross payments for the taxable property or service at 23%. In effect, this is a regressive plan that insulates the rich and their non-income-based assets from taxation, while middle-class households would likely see a net tax increase, according to a Tax Policy Center analysis and a Treasury study performed during the Bush administration. Simplifying the tax code is a good idea. Bernie and Elizabeth Warren both had very simple tax plans for a wealth tax, 3% on wealth earned after that first measly $1 billion. The legislation would ensure a 30% audit rate for the super wealthy. Sounds like a plan that actually addresses the problem with the IRS. But elite corporate-bought Republicans seem not to want that. They just want to launder their own get-rich-quick scheme via the legitimate concerns of working-class Americans, who are, in fact, currently victimized by the IRS. If it sounds like I'm repeating myself, it's because the root problem of inequality in this country never really changes. Only the excuses for why we shouldn't focus on them do. We have got to have more discipline when it comes to identifying distractions and misdirections and figure out ways to pass the policies working people actually want, not the weaponized working class identity politics elites use to launder their own agenda.
Well, we need to stop doing the corporate welfare. Instead of, having more IRS agents and trying to recoup the money that was given to corporate interests and wealthy people, that shouldn't have been. We should just end those policies and stop doing it in the first place. No more bailouts.
It should be both.
No more. Okay.
It should be both.
It should be. But you see how it's it's like unnecessary, like we're creating work for ourselves by, I mean, you agree, you oppose giving them all the money in the first place.
The left wasn't advocating for corporate bailouts during
well, neither
COVID.
was the libertarian right.
Right, but this is what happens in this country. In order to get the pennies that the regular people got, your little $1,600 check, little child tax credit that ends after a year, temporary housing moratorium, stuff that really meant a lot. I don't mean to minimize it, but those were crumbs compared to the sums that elites got. But that's how it goes. We can get something sometimes, but it's grandfathered in along with the must-pass legislation that the rich ensure for themselves. That's why I think that some of the stuff that the Republican Freedom Caucus folks have held out for and wanting to separate out bills, and so their single-issue bills, is a good innovation, because it prevents. On some level, it could hypothetically prevent wealthy people from sneaking their agenda through on the backs of poor people. But rhetorically, that's still happening, right? I think, look, I've said this in a radar, I've said this a million times. The IRS is not doing a good job. It is focusing on the poor. But it's not doing so because it's like rubbing its hands together saying, oh, yeah, I want to go get poor people. It's because that's what it has the resources to do using the, these kind of like more cursory types of audits that they can do for people who are they're just have very simple tax filings. So if you want to change that and you don't want to let rich people off the hook, you're going to have some mechanism. You don't have to call it the IRS. I don't care if you end the IRS and start a new program, but you can't get away with ending the only program to audit rich people under the guise of helping poor people.
If you're going to do tax collection at all, you need people to collect taxes, yes. I want people to keep more of the money that they actually earn for themselves and not receive in the first place money that was given to them by the government. It's not the government's money because the government doesn't make any money, just confiscates ours. And those, which is, by the way, what actual Americans, right, left, and center all want. No one supports bailouts for the big banks or for the airlines and then they don't even do what they say they're going to do with that money. And then we have these we have these traffic jams because they got rid of all the pilots anyway, and et cetera, and all that. They never do.
Because they didn't invest in their own company. Yeah. They didn't invest to update the scheduling technology.
But they just can't be trusted. We have to stop this policy of just giving them, say, oops, you screwed up, here's a bunch of money, and then expecting them to.
Yeah, but here's part of the issue. Regular people don't have enough money. That is why they're so much reliant on government subsidies. Regular people are not getting the same compensation for their productivity and labor as they were 50 years ago. And there is a direct correlation between the shares that are going to workers and the diminished shares going to workers and the increased shares going to the super rich. So if you don't want the money to have to be filtered through this complicated tax system and then redistributed to poor people, if you want poor people to actually be able to live and have a living wage, then you have to advocate for policies that put constraints on the wealthy who have been using their power to buy off Congress and to get a favorable tax code and to get favorable legislation that enables them to not have any laborers to not have any leverage in the workforce, which is why laborers had such a good deal, comparatively good deal back in the 50s. If you want to rectify that, if you want to go back to the good old halcyon days of the 50s, you have to address all of the policies that we have today that prevent that outcome.
Yeah. As long as you still, we've been advocates for, I was very interested in something like what Andrew Yang proposed, the minimum basic income to help poor people and even middle class people have a minimum standard of living. Something that is simple, because the more complicated it gets, the more it seems that powerful people can gain whatever it is.
Why not force companies to pay people what they're owed? I'm not against a minimum income, Andrew Yang style program, or a guaranteed living wage.
The value of their labor is whatever they're willing to get for it.
And that's exactly why you have to do labor organizing, because all of these CEOs sit there and will honestly tell you on their earning calls that they think that the wealth that they have accumulated on your backs is not from you and your contributed labor. And the only way that you can force them to pay you what you actually are owed is to organize your workplace and threaten to withhold their labor. And we'll see how much they can earn if you don't show up at work.
Fine for people doing that.
That's the only way, collective action. Because you see, there's no one who's fighting for you. That's the way it is.
Okay, that's fine. I don't object to any of that. And I also object to how a lot of wealthy corporate interests get their money by rigging the system against everyone else, they have more access to power and the writing and creating the structures that allow them to get that wealth. So I'm against all that.
Okay. All right.
All right. We're going to leave it there.
Leave it there.
Before we peel any more layers of this onion.
I can't wait to hear about your special bonus radar next.